Nothing hidden, nothing missed. The Lansweeper podcast.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Nothing Hidden, Nothing Missed, the Lansweeper podcast. I'm Gary Blower. I'm part of Lansweeper's ecosystem team, and I'm joined today by my special guest, Sid, who I'll let introduce themselves.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'm Sid. I work at Atlassian now, but prior to this, I've spent a lot of time both at Microsoft and in my own startup trying to figure out how agents misbehave and how do I send them to detention when they do.
I love that, by the way, because I always refer to agents as kind of stroppy teenagers. So I'm glad that you use that metaphor as well. Fantastic. Yes. So big hint there for this very first episode of our podcast. We're going to talk about the hottest topic at the moment, which is basically AI agents. So everyone's experimenting with AI agents. Not everyone is getting reliable results. So we're going to explore that theme in this show and hopefully give you, the listener, a better understanding of the challenges and how we might be able to offer some advice. So personally, over the past sort of year or two, particularly with Atlassian, I'll be honest, most of the agents I build are either with Claude or with Rovo, but I've built a lot of agents for IT service management use cases. Now, that's quite a specific niche, and I know you've got so much more experience when it comes to sort of AI pilots and stuff. So what kind of separates the ones that work well from the ones that don't?
So I think the latest word that we're using is called the harness, and we love inventing new words in tech. Even the idea is not new. Like every meaningful technology had a scaffolding around the core technology before it became usable at scale. Video calls, we are on one. It's a simple example. It was not just Skype or WebEx. It was the microphone. It was the decent headphones, conference systems, high-speed routers, all the plumbing that made the call clearer. Because one of the things that we realized was if the connection was bad, the people did not just hear less clearly; they judged the content of the meeting itself. And this is the same thing happening with AI agents right now. We need to create that scaffolding around the models, around the reasoning, around the LLMs. And people do keep debating the brilliance of the model, which matters, of course. But in practice, what I've seen be successful is where people have built these harnesses around the model, grounding them with permissions, workflow design, escalation, auditability, or quality. And I mean, UI is coming back, design's coming back in a big way because contextual compression is happening in the human's head who has to make the decision. So the AI failed is a common theme that I hear. And then when I dig deeper, I'm like, okay, why do you think AI failed? And then we realize the scaffolding, or as we call it now, the harness wasn't there.
Okay. And the harness is, I mean, some of the other terms that I've heard bandied about, you mentioned one, grounding, context. Are these all part of the same thing? Harness like a collective term for these concepts?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a new term. We love like throwing out a new term every time. When you think about it, this kind of thinking has existed for quite some time. When databases first came out, like we needed to abstract out the complexity. We created something called the middleware. Now, middleware is not as sexy, so we don't want to call it that. We want to call it something else. If you go deep into software engineering, and if you spend enough time, I was a trained software engineer 18 years ago, and these were things I read in books, and I was like, okay, we're going back to first principles of software engineering, trying to figure out how to use this new technology and create a scaffolding around it. And the most successful people that I've seen figure out is the people who have understood the problem of creating the right scaffolding for the large language models to hold them and to help them direct them in some way or form.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And certainly, that's something which I think by pure luck, maybe some intuition. I was a software developer way back in the day as well. Nice. It's something that I discovered quite early on when I started building agents for these kind of ITSM contexts, was that the more, like I said, they were like stroppy teenagers. If you just gave it a vague thing to do, it would do it very vaguely and very confidently.
Yes.
But once you started to provide it with, scaffolding is a good word. I like that. Some sort of, focus and backgrounds to what it needed to do. It certainly started to get much better results. I mean, the early stuff I tried to do, certainly with things like Atlassian Rovo, was that I started to do sort of API calls out to other systems to provide just a JSON file really within the to give it to the agent, to give it some background and some context to what it was trying to do, and I was getting amazing results by doing that. So yeah, and obviously the world has moved on, and that's much more advanced now. One thing I know that I had this debate with a colleague a few days ago, actually, and when we talk about agentic AI, we're talking about using an AI to take autonomous actions. And one of the challenges that my colleague sort of mentioned was that if you've got an inefficient process and then you're looking to use an agentic AI to automate that process, surely you're just automating inefficiency.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I have an example of this, which sort of hit home very early. This was still the GPT-3 era. Oh my God, we're calling it eras. But GPT-3 era, where I was working at that point of time as a director of product for Microsoft. And I was brought in, and there was this large enterprise customer. So I used to do these briefings with execs, and Fortune 50 customer, they come in, they have the chief procurement officer, and they're like, hey, listen, we need to build these 50-page documentation for our finance teams to review before we can even get started. Can Gen AI help us do that? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like it's a standard document format. Like, I don't understand why not. I mean, you don't even need Gen AI, but okay, sure. If you want to use Gen AI, you can. And GPT-3 actually did a pretty good job because of all the constraints that were available to us, the scaffolding. 4.5, 5 weeks later, I get another call from the same account exec. He's like, can you come and do another briefing? I said, I literally just did one for the chief procurement. They're like, no, it's the chief financial officers team now who's here. They're like, the procurement team is sending us too many documents. Can you use Gen AI to summarize all of them? I was like, I can, but do you think this is the best use of their money? I know, like, we will make a little bit of money, but let's like try to talk to them. And we realized, like, both of those leaders were incentivized to use AI in some way or form, which in itself is not a bad thing. But when you think about the behavior drives and the work, so we sat down with them and we said, hey, listen, your process right now is archaic from the 70s and 80s. And we understand why it was like that then. But now we just need to rethink. So what we created was something completely different. We said, okay, the procurement team will actually put in the requirements and stuff into this common pool of database. We will create Gen AI agents which will argue and sort of have a consensus. And like now we know what multi-model consensus is, but over that time it was very primitive. And then tell you, either the procurement team, like, why would finance push back on this, or tell the finance team why this is a good idea. So instead of you creating a document, summarizing a document, we said we can use the same amount of money, actually lesser money than you are going to spend on this entire system, and give you a better result by rethinking the process. So I think those are kind of examples which hit home, where just throwing AI into an existing process without rethinking what changed, what is the intent, is a place where most people make mistakes. And I do too, because I have an expertise in a particular domain. The reason I have an expertise in a domain is because I've been able to build shortcuts in my head, and now I need to rethink all the shortcuts and rethink my biases. So it's a net new learning curve. Even if you're an expert of, like, I don't know, in my case, 14 years in a domain, I have to rethink that first principles and be like, okay, is there a different way to do this?
Yeah, of course. And I guess, I mean, the example you gave there was agent to agent interaction. Is there any sort of extra consideration or extra scaffolding that you need to consider when you're looking to do that kind of, two autonomous agents that are trying to deal with a problem or negotiate on your behalf, really?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we had to work a lot on grounding, and I'm still caught in this constant whirlpool of when do I fine tune a model, when do I ground a model, how do I get the relevance and the resonance to work? Like everybody focuses right now on the relevance, but the resonance is how much does it sound like me, how much does it think like me, and that gives me confidence in the agent as well. It's almost like a mentor-mentee relationship, like you build over a period of time, and that's why memory is so important. And like at Atlassian, we are investing in all of these boring things, which is like how do you have memory, enterprise level memory, workflow caching. We talked about that like a few months ago, but also realistically thinking about how do you help somebody who does not know how the enterprise works and operates to operate within that ecosystem, but at the same point of time, not really completely lose their own identity and the way of thinking. So it's this constant struggle. Um, Fine tuning works really great in low frequency, high impact cases. So, where you need to have something that is highly structured, super high impact, but the frequency of change is not high. So, you can fine tune a model, it will get better. And that's why, like a lot of enterprises which have like a way of working, like fine tuning models. Uh, Graph based graph rag, and now we have distillation models and a whole bunch of other things that are coming up. These work really well when you know that the things are what I call discardable decision. So maybe I have to make a decision today, but the state of the market might change in 3 months. So I don't want to fine tune a model for the state of the market today because it's going to change. So marketing is a great example where you you might not get as much value by fine tuning a model because the variables are shifting and the dependencies are shifting so much. So using better reasoning models over there. And then there is the scaffolding of guardrails. There's the guardrails that you build about don't do harm sort of thing, like very broad. But then there's the constitutional guardrails. Anthropic actually, kudos to them for releasing this paper, I think 2 years ago, on how to create a constitutional governance around it. And then there's the last bit, which is the individual guardrails. Like, what do I want to do? Because I can tell, like, I can actually write to my ChatGPT or Claude, uh, write or think like Simon Sinek. Now that is something that we call we at Atlassian we have established a Hippocratic oath for PMMs for using AI, because it's almost like it's very easy to skirt around ethical concerns that have not yet been legally solidified. So if you're borrowing somebody's like intellectual output, you should credit them in some way or form, and that's where there's a lot of chaos because. Especially when you come to places where you have agentic AI that's going to write your marketing copy, hyper personalize it to your customer, create slides for sales enablement decks. Like that's where these things start to emerge a little bit more than just doing like work where you have to move from one system to the other.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that's really interesting in its own right. And I hadn't really considered like you said, the kind of guardrails, the kind of building those kind of additional ethical guardrails into particularly those sort of roles that are a little bit more, I don't know, let's call it creative for want of a better word. I know in Lansweeper we've been very much focused on making sure that in terms of our AI strategy for customers is more about making sure that we provide the scaffolding or the plumbing, if you like. We provide all that contextual data for other agents and models to use, so understanding what's in your network environment, understanding what vulnerabilities you have, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think even within that there's certain guardrails and limitations that we've had to consider as well. thinking of, and I love your when you talk about sort of training. I did a talk actually with to some of our customers a few weeks ago on sort of building IT service management agents, and I refer to it as sort of being a Pokemon trainer because I've got
Yeah.
these pocket monsters which I've been fine tuning and training them, leveling them up, as it were. It's quite a good metaphor.
And
So you mentioned some of the stuff yeah, thank you. Yeah, you mentioned some of the stuff that you've been working on and some of the stuff you're doing at Atlassian. Can you give us a sort of sneak peek as to where current thinking is and where we're likely to go?
Yeah, I think we're at one of those inflection points where, looking back, we'll try to figure out like what are agents is something needs to get defined right now. So, like, looking back, this is the moment where people will, uh, within the next year or so, people will define what an agent is. Because when I talk to people right now, it's fascinating even internally to get so many different um, definitions. Now, of course, the large language models are driving a definition of agents. The workflow and automation companies are driving a definition of agents. So, uh, I personally just think of it like you said, a teenager that I can send to detention and
Yeah.
control in some way or form, where I can say, you made a boo boo, you don't get ice cream. So the reality is that we don't we don't have a consensus on what truly defines an agent today, because it could be a tool, it could be something with an LLM, it could be data plus like a reasoning model, and all of those definitions will hold true if the entire ecosystem says that it's something that takes information and gives you an output. And I'm like, oh, that's also a software program. So so essentially, I think that is the one thing that keeps me up at night, is like, how do I define the agent in a way that my team understands, and how do we make sure that we listen to what the market is saying, what. And I spend a lot more time on Reddit than I spend on anywhere else now, because that's where a lot of this emergent thinking is happening. Is this is how I build memory for my agent? This is how I build my tools for the agent. This is how I build XYZ. And we listen to our customers, we listen to our users, we listen to sort of people. So two things that are emerging is, there's an agent that helps a human to do stuff, and we call that the side rail agent. So something where you have the UI in front of you and there's an agent in the side rail. The UI changes, similar to computer usage. You can see that with Gemini and all of the others. But the agent is doing something in front of you in the UI. The problem with that is I have to babysit the agent. I have to click on approve and do stuff. So higher amount of auditability, higher amount of verification, because it's happening in front of me. I can sip a coffee, watch it do stuff. But it's not multiplexing my bandwidth. So at this point of time, from a company perspective, like if I switch my brain to like an enterprise, a CFO, I'm paying for the human plus I'm paying for AI. So it's really hard to justify that. The second one is where I'm multiplexing the bandwidth of my person. So we call this directional delegation. So now we've built all the scaffolding, we've built all the prompts, we've built all the tools. It's not going to automate a lot of things that are the final delivery, like let's say the last 5%, like send the Slack message. But it's almost like I get a Slack message, or I get a email, whatever, and I delegate that. I'm like, Rovo, listen, work on this, goes on the side. While I attend a Zoom call, I do something else. It's essentially doing, preparing, and making stuff happen on the side for me. It's not asking for as many approvals because it's working in a sandbox. So it's confined to the blast radius of what it can affect. Uh, and that's something that was really hard for us to build, because it needs to pull in all the context but not push out anything that breaks stuff. And that was a fun experiment. And and at that point of time, once you complete your other task, whatever task the human was doing, they can come back and validate. The problem over there was we did not know what steps it took. So it was a 0 or 1 problem. So how do you undo? And that's where we built a third layer, which was like, we asked the agent to use Jira as we would. So we own Jira at Atlassian. So we said, listen, store all of your documentation into Confluence, store all of your code, if you build code, into GitHub or Bitbucket, whichever one you want to use. We use Bitbucket, but yeah, and store
Yeah.
all of your uh, all of your tasks and subtasks and stuff in Jira, like an actual person would. And this was the beauty of it. We could understand and track and trace what the agent did. So at that point of time, I became a manager of 3 or 4 agents where I could track and trace a Jira board and be like, okay, version 1, version 2, version 3, this was the comment. Okay, this is what they changed. This is the point that I want to go back, because they're leaving the codes, like they leave a unique identifier. Like, this is what we did at this particular point or this commit. I'm like, undo to this commit. And then they undo only to a part of it. And then I can take it forward. So essentially, what we realized accidentally, because of these experiments, was Jira and Confluence essentially helped us do 2 things. The first one was, instead of having all these markdown files on your computer, and using it on a local chat machine, now you could use ChatGPT and Claude and Rovo and whatever, while having a common context backbone. The context backbone was these like tools that everybody could connect through MCP or A2A. So that's where we said, okay, and we gave them write back facilities. So we were one of the first companies to actually have write back for MCP, because this is what we were trying to experiment. Is like, how do we make our tools the way that humans and agents actually talk to each other, not only on the final artifact, but on the messy middle, on where things are happening, and you can control them in a more like granular way without having to click on approve every time.
Yeah, the way you describe it, and I, as someone who's been an Atlassian customer and consultant for 20 years, I 100% can understand that. The way you describe it there, it kind of, to kind of like use another metaphor, it sounds like almost the human is almost acting like a chef. So the human is kind of multitasking all these things, but allowing the agent to get on and do those, but also being able to track and trace what the agent has done, so you can then validate, and like you say, and validate what, especially what it's achieved, and then it's easy enough for it to change it. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned about the Atlassian MCP, because I do actually, in my day job at Lansweeper, do use it quite extensively. We use Jira and Confluence internally, and most stuff I output to Confluence. So yeah, it's super useful, and and it's great that you can just sort of fire and forget, and then just go and review what the agent has done. And do you see that, that's kind of an immediate future? And I know it's very difficult with AI to make any kind of forecasting because it's changing so rapidly, but do you see that these agents become more autonomous over time as these models and tools become more powerful?
Absolutely. So I think like the tools are becoming smarter in terms of how you push and pull guardrails. Um, we are not just authentication, but like really understanding the role, really understanding the whole RBAC ecosystem with MCP's new version coming out. So super excited about that standard moving forward, which again, as Atlassian, we are a part of the foundation that is defining this. But also with the reasoning models getting better. So one of the things is that if an underpinning technology gets better, I should not have to recreate the entire thing. It should just get better with it. So that is the mindset that we need to have, like at least at Atlassian we have, is we create the right ecosystems for more intelligent reasoning models to thrive once they get to that point, whether it's Opus 5 or whatever comes out next, or Mythos, which is the mythical model that everybody's talking about.
Oh. Yeah.
But essentially, we should not have to re-architect every single time. So again, that's the traditional tech debt problem. Like, how do you build something like that? The second thing, which I think is happening, and like I said, we stumbled upon during our experimentation, and then we doubled down on it, is reducing the cognitive load on humans to be able to manage approvals. Like if I don't know, and provenance is an important part. I built something on the side for myself, which was like, how do I write essays with provenance? Sorry, how do I write essays with provenance in the best way possible, where everybody has an allergic reaction to an AI generated piece of content. But what if I could tell you then this is my weekend project. What if I could tell you that this part was written by a human? This part was a discussion with AI, which has been synthesized, and this part was completely created by AI because it was to complete the entire like thesis of the essay. And so we've started experimenting on things like provenance of agents and work as well. So how do you track when your Gamma agent built a presentation which was completely autonomous? So I would spend, as a human, I would spend a little bit more time on auditing that than something that was done by my colleague or that was done by me manually, because I know I audited it while I was building it. So the provenance conversation is something that's emerging. The conversation of transparency, of course, has existed. We saw so many open source libraries that came out for agent control that were essentially replicating what Jira already does, but for your computer. So you could download those libraries and run it on your computer. We said, why don't we just make it easy for people to use Jira? Because it's got a UI for humans, and now if we make it a first class UI for the agents, we just get this point of convergence where it writes it in a format that agent understands, and it's a translator of sorts, and writes it in a format that humans understand and can visualize without having to read massive walls of text. So that's where I believe like the next shift is going to happen is the UI patterns that will emerge, the design patterns that will emerge, that will be fundamentally different. I don't think people will want, humans at least, would want too many tools that they have to look at and context switch at the same time. So you'll see MCP, we do UI where it's inline UI. So your tool gets shown inside your chat. Great progress over there. And it's making us question a lot about our design of the tools as well.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I think the sheer volume of tools and things like that out there. I mean, these things always happen in IT, is that there's everyone throws something out there and eventually everything gets consolidated down to like a core set of products and software. Yeah, definitely. Right, I think we should wrap things up there. I give you an opportunity really just to sort of give a bit of a plug as to what you're up to, where people can find out more about what you're doing.
Absolutely. So we're actually going to be announcing a whole bunch of stuff in a couple of weeks. I work closely with our product teams that are building all things AI. Our brand name is Rovo. So when you hear Rovo, it's an ecosystem of products that allow you to interface with AI. Everybody's like, is it your AI agent? Is it your AI chatbot? Is it your AI MCP server? A2A? We're like, it's actually an ecosystem that goes across all of these, because Atlassian is committed to providing people the right tools and the right UI for where they are at their journey today. Because we understand, like, we're going through this, like, I don't know, puberty phase where everybody wants something different. And we are committed to providing the first class experience, even if it means that we have to take on a little bit of technical debt, because we want to do right by the customer. So you have the APIs that have existed. People have stable systems built around that. We are giving you the MCPs. A2A just got announced yesterday, which is why I'm here at Google Cloud Next right now. And then we have a whole bunch of really exciting announcements that are going to come out in a couple of weeks at Team 26, which is Atlassian's sort of premier event. And the synthesis of all of that is we want to meet where the customers are, use the AI that they want. If they want to use their own AI system, great. We will enable the A2A and MCP ecosystems. Depending on the admin controls that they want, they might want to, and there's a whole bunch of ways to like reduce the context usage or the token windows. So we would support all of those things. Longer term, I think is really both understanding and adhering to the standards that are being defined by the open community to make our products first class citizens of the agentic economy, but also driving some amount of of unique things that only we can drive, where we have a system of work. So because we have had Confluence and we have had Jira, and we understand how these things talk to each other, how these connect with some of our third-party connectors, it's almost like having a cheat sheet for how these systems operate. So we are exposing that out. Please stay tuned as probably a cheat sheet for your agent to get stuff done.
That sounds cool. And yeah, I think this episode might come out after Team 26, but I will be there as well. So
I would love to meet you.
Actually, yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, and I'm actually doing a few little bits and pieces with around the Robo Ops agent when I'm there. So yeah, super interesting. Thank you. Thanks for that, Sid. So it leads me to really to wrap things up for this very first episode. If you're listening to the podcast, then you can provide us feedback, or if there's anything you want to discuss or any podcast topics you'd like us to cover, you can actually find us on Reddit, as Sid was mentioning earlier. We have a Lansweeper Reddit on there, which you can leave feedback, and that's where our Lansweeper community currently is. If you've watched this from LinkedIn or YouTube, then obviously leave a comment and a like, and we will look at those and we'll get back to you. But we should do really to thank Sid for joining me in this very first episode of the Nothing Hidden, Nothing Missed podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and makes it more special that it's the first.
Thank you very much. And I do hope you'll join us all again next month for the next episode. Until then, goodbye.